Better?
Yes, excellent, thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you all again for the opportunity to provide this very brief overview of the impact evaluation of PSS interventions within the Integrated Essential Emergency Education Services program on grades 3 through 6, conducted by our Laser Pulse team. In this brief overview, I'm hoping to be able to share some important aspects of the design process, development of research tools, and some top-level findings and takeaways, setting the stage for our broader moderated discussion regarding the successes and challenges of the study and where it fits into larger efforts of understanding inclusions of psychosocial support and social emotional learning within education programming. The findings I'll share today are complex and difficult to explain in a short presentation like this, but our panelists will delve more deeply into some of the most important lessons learned, and we'll also provide some links to the full text of the evaluation and some other sources where you can find more information and a deeper discussion. So I'll start with a little bit of background, if I can get my screen to work correctly. Sorry. Okay. Just on, since we have a large group today from a variety of countries and academic backgrounds, it seems helpful to start with a bit of background on the educational context in South Sudan, why psychosocial support is needed, and how that support is integrated into educational programming. In South Sudan, challenges accessing quality education for children and youth already existed prior to independence and have only been exacerbated by the outbreaks of new violence in December 2013 and July 2016. The conflict resulted in displacement, increase in school dropouts, consistently low enrollment in education services, and in addition to limited access to quality education, children and youth have faced the psychological impact of experiencing or witnessing violence. The impact evaluation we will discuss today was focused on psychosocial support within UNICEF's Integrated Essential Emergency Education Services, or IEEES, which has provided access to safe quality education for over 600,000 South Sudanese children. The program integrated psychosocial support into education activities in child-friendly spaces and schools. These psychosocial support activities generally fall into three categories: play, learning, and well-being. The play-based activities include sports and games, while learning activities and well-being activities are more structured lessons that aim to teach children the skills to deal with stress, improve social emotional skills, or build resilience. At the time of the study, UNICEF was expanding the reach of PSS programming to include new skills, which offered us an opportunity to attempt to capture the impact of including this type of support. So just briefly to discuss the research questions that guided the study here, the main one being, what are the impacts of psychosocial support interventions on students' well-being, resilience, and academic performance? And I think I would like to note that a unique feature here was looking at possible correlations between PSS interventions and academic performance. So regarding our methodology, despite some significant challenges undertaking this research in a conflict-affected area, we were able to use a mixed methods, two-phase approach with 64 schools. 28 were control schools and 36 treatment schools in 5 South Sudanese states, which you can see highlighted in red. I should also note that I'm using the term schools here to signify a variety of different types of learning spaces, which encompass everything from government schools to temporary learning spaces in protection of civilians camps. We consider the relatively large scope of the research, being able to reach nearly 3,000 students and 600 teachers in the survey phase and administer academic assessments to over 600 students, a tremendous success, particularly in light of the difficulties of operating in South Sudan. Another success is the design and implementation of the study and the instruments used. In a systematic review, that USAID recently conducted of cell programming. Our study was rated very high, the strongest rating level within their quality assessment. We designed the study and research tools through a series of collaborative and participatory workshops where we spent extensive time on contextualization. And then the study was carried out, as you can see, in a two-phase process. The first phase included the student surveys at primary grades 3 and 6, and teacher surveys, and desk review of documents. And the second phase, which consisted of student assessments using a modified EGRA and EGMA, and 5 case studies in 5 treatment schools in 5 states. I'll tell you a little bit more about the research design in the next slide. I'll provide a brief description of the research tools here. We're also going to provide a link for an in-depth article that was recently published in the Journal of Education and Emergencies regarding the process of contextualization. We feel that it's really important to design a locally contextualized tool, and it can be a good model for others who wish to adopt that process. So for the survey tool, we reviewed an extensive amount of existing measures that had previously been tested or validated in South Sudan or similar contexts. Ultimately, we selected or adapted questions mainly from the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire and the Child and Youth Resilience measures. For the academic assessment, we chose to conduct modified versions of the early grades mathematics and reading assessments. And finally, we conducted a desk review of materials of previous EGRA and EGMA data, and as well as 5 in-depth case studies with focus group discussions and key informant interviews that provided additional contextual information. The study identified meaningful gains in both student well-being and academic performance that suggest the effectiveness of the inclusion of psychosocial support in the activity. Results showed enhanced student reading scores and social well-being among students who received interventions. In addition to improvements in reading and well-being, the study also found teacher perceptions of better relationships, academic performance, attendance, classroom efficacy, and peace-building skills as a result of PSS. While the evaluation provides strong evidence towards including psychosocial support interventions in education programming, a few of the indicators showed unclear or negative impacts. Aggregate math scores, for instance, had significant negative differences in scores on word problems, level 2 subtraction, and level 1 addition. The study also found no significant difference in resilience and coping between treatment schools and control school students. These mixed outcomes suggest that additional research is needed. It's also important to note the differences in results between South Sudanese states, and that different locations had different experiences in conflict and resulting trauma, as well as experiencing more extended interruptions in schooling. Operating in a conflict-affected area means that there were many variables beyond our control, and that data requires additional analysis and interpretation. Another area that I think requires additional study, you'll note that in emotional well-being, there were positive differences for boys, but no difference for girls. So further research on gender in psychosocial support is an area for possible study. And finally, I just want to share a few key takeaways that we learned from this process. The most important one being that contextualization is critical to success. We consider the robust participatory process we underwent to design and pilot the study and to understand the findings the most important component of this undertaking. The successful process for development and field testing of the research tools was critical, as was the extensive information collected as part of the case studies, which helped us further understand the findings from the surveys and the academic assessments. Another important lesson learned is the level of complexity involved in conducting a study of this size and scope in a conflict-affected environment. We faced a challenging timeline and significant challenges in data collection, including difficulties both with access to schools due to conflict, but also climate. It was rainy season and many areas were difficult to reach. And with defining treatment and control schools when they were not always so clearly defined. due to different interventions that had previously happened. So we feel that the results of the study show the potential value of including psychosocial support in education programming, though the mixed outcomes do require further analysis and interpretation and suggest many potential avenues for research. I have the links listed there, but I'll also pop them into the chat as soon as I finish sharing my screen here. And there you can see more information. And I am going to hand it over to my colleague and co-principal investigator, Tom Turok, to moderate the panel discussion, which we really feel is the opportunity to delve more deeply into these topics that I presented just briefly. So, Tom?
Thanks very much, Charlene, and for that great presentation, and welcome to everyone who's joining us today from wherever you're coming from. I'm going to start first by introducing our panelists. We've got a great team here, and from a couple of different wakes of life and organizations that were involved with this study. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Amur Turok. He is an associate professor of applied linguistics and TESOL in the College of Education at Upper Nile University in South Sudan. His research and teaching interests involve thinking skills, discourse analysis, psycholinguistics, and sociolinguistics, and he was the lead research associate for this study based in South Sudan. Dr. Jennifer DeBear is an associate professor of engineering education and mechanical engineering at Purdue University. Dr. DeBear conducts education research and supports diverse students around the world as they access, develop, and meaningfully apply engineering skills within their own communities. And Dr. DeBear helped lead the quantitative component of this study. Her graduate research assistant was Moses Olayemi, also within the School of Engineering Education at Purdue University. His research revolves around the development of local competencies in sub-Saharan Africa, and he's been working within the sub-Saharan Africa STEM education landscape as a teacher, trainer, teacher, and researcher for nearly a decade. And if she's able to join us today, we're still kind of waiting for her, but Dr. Wendy Wheaton is a senior education advisor for USAID. She has over 20 years of experience in developing educational standards, policies, guidance, programs, and technical response modalities in Africa, with particular experience in conflict and crisis settings. And then I know we're also trying to, he's having some technical problems today, but Daniel Wani from the South Sudan Mission, USAID South Sudan Mission. He's the Education Program Management Specialist with USAID in South Sudan and played a critical role with this study as well. So welcome to our esteemed panelists. So I'll kick this off first by Arlene coming back to you, actually, and thank you very much for outlining the process that was used to contextualize and localize this study. How would you say that this process that was used differs or really stands out from what's normally done within kind of our environments where impact evaluations are carried out?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think what was unique about the participatory process that we were able to have, and we were very fortunate that we were able to conduct this through a process that included 3 face-to-face workshops. The first one really focused on design, designing the study, the questions, the approach, the instruments, working on the instruments together, where we were able to review all of the existing possible measures and work on looking at whether they were contextually appropriate. In some cases, adding some new questions or changing things around. And all stakeholders were really involved in that process. So USAID was represented, UNICEF was represented, our South Sudanese research team, which brought in a lot of local and contextual knowledge. And so we were able to do that, pilot and field test the instruments before conducting the survey part of the research, and then come back together again and look at the preliminary results and look at the gaps that existed there, figure out what our approach needed to be for the second phase of the research, and refine our strategy, and think about what information we needed to gather in terms of interpreting the data. And then the final step, the dissemination workshop, where we were able to present our findings, or an early version of our findings, to stakeholders and get their input and get their interpretation, and through that kind of learn from the process as well. So it was kind of a very in-depth process. It was, not simple, and probably the biggest disadvantage, not cheap, because it did involve a lot of face-to-face contact, but it did give us a really thorough process. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Arlene. Yeah, from what I'm hearing and what I remember as well, a high level of engagement throughout across those who would be using the evidence generated from this research, as well as those generators who are contributing to this, both kind of in person and also remote. And yes, it can be costly, but certainly very fruitful in terms of that kind of level of interaction between all these different stakeholders. Very cool. Thank you very much. My next question is for Dr. Amur, and what I'll say is that I do have a few questions just to get us started, but thanks to those of you who are already populating questions into the chat box. I encourage anybody who's interested to continue doing so, and we'll be moving to those questions shortly. Dr. Amur, if you could speak to what do you think is the most valuable aspect or takeaway that came out of this research?
Thank you, Tom, and I welcome all our viewers and participants.
Hi, Tom. Daniel from Cuba, just to let you know that I'm able to.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Daniel.
All right, sorry for the interruption. I think among the valuable points that I've recorded here, and I'm quite happy that Arlene mentioned some of them, is that the field of education in emergencies is a new field in terms of, offering education services to students who are, living in conflict areas. Despite the fact that South Sudan has been embroiled in war for over 50 decades, I think this is among the first, if not the first study that was carried out in South Sudan, looking at the emotional and social well-being of the students under conflict. And this gives significance to the finding that we have found in highlighting the challenges faced by the students, as well as the opportunities that we can grab, to deliver quality education to students who are living in similar situations. I believe the finding that we found here would really help researchers who are carrying out research in different areas who are experiencing similar problems, to give them some clue and insights about some of the challenges and the opportunities for students who are living in conflict areas. I was really amused by students' response during the study, where some of them have very clear idea of the ambitions and aspirations that they would like to achieve, but being hampered by being living in a state of war. Some of them do have really clear idea that it is only through education that they can make progress in their life, and without education, so the life circle will remain as it is, and for them, this is something that they would like to see remedy for. I'm also happy to feel that you see, students do value education, and they look at the schools as zone of peace. And I can quote one was said by one of the students in Akobo that we know each other, we are coming from different clans, our clans have been fighting, but when we are in the school, we look at ourselves as brothers and sisters, and we forget for a while what we do have, you see, in our communities. And I think this is also has been highlighted in the literature we read that the school is being viewed by many students as a zone of peace, as a place where we can really foster unity among various communities who are fighting among ourselves. And therefore, with the initiative which is now emerging, you see, turning the school into a zone, peace zones, and with injection of some programs, I think if PSS can be really, you see, integrated with some kind of selective instructions in civic service, I think this can be helpful for students who are going to be next generation of leaders. Eileen have highlighted, you see, the importance of, you see, coordination and collaboration among multiple stakeholders and partners. And I think this one was really the strength of this study, because as she mentioned, in fact, we were dealing with a very flexible kind of plans that we keep on changing our plans every then and now. But because due to the advantage of, you see, having technology within us, we were able to change our plans every then and now whenever we encounter any problem, and including all the stakeholders, all the partners. So it was really very good experience that I ever had in conducting research with multiple stakeholders and multiple partners. I would like also to highlight the importance of adapting EGRA and EGMA. With the help of the local people, we managed to come up with something, but still also there is a gap that we need future research to focus on the appropriateness of the tools and concepts that we adapted into this culture. And as she mentioned, we are living in different zones with different cultural background, different linguistic background, and then with different education, you see, delivery, which is really very important because there is a lot of diversities on the ground. If you go to South Sudan here, you will find a lot of diversity. So this area, I think, is a takeaway that we could really capitalize on in future research. There is the final thought that I would like just to highlight is that you see the thin line between treatment and control group, which Arlene also mentioned. For me, I think there is a question now, you see, researchers are asking whether you see it is fair to give some students some kind of interventions and leave the rest without any intervention or without any alternative. But the funny part of it is that the students have been usually interacting on a daily basis. And even some of the child-friendly spaces are being shared. But yet we found that there is usually positive, significant results, differences between social well-being, emotional well-being, and there is no significance really in coping mechanisms that the students were used. I think that one also is a very interesting area that future research would really investigate. So I will stop here. Thank you very much, Tom, once again.
Great. Thanks very much, Dr. Amur. Thanks for all those ideas and comments, and in particular that beautiful reminder of just the function that schools can serve in many of these conflict environments as a safe space for children and opportunity for forming future generations of peace builders. Great, we'll move very quickly to a couple more questions, and then I do want to get to the questions that are coming up into the chat box. There are quite a few of them, but I did want to give Jennifer and Moses, just if you could speak very quickly to what did we learn regarding approaches and how to link academic outcomes with SCL?
Yeah, so Moses and I'll tag team on this a little bit, and I'll ask him first to share a slide that goes into a bit more depth to what Arlene was alluding to, the process that we used to provide both a rigorous, robust, but very contextualized set of instruments, research design, and approaches to evaluating the intervention. So I'm not going to go through every step here, but suffice it to say that from the beginning, the participatory workshops that Arlene referred to, our full team was having discussions about the local context and what the constructs we were interested in understanding, well-being, and resilience, and what that really means in the South Sudanese context. From there, we built off of existing instruments and selected the most relevant questions. And then we went through a process of instrument validation and reliability factor analysis. So I know there's a couple of questions that have come up in the chat that I'm sort of going to answer in what I'm saying now. We felt that it was important to actually look at how the different aspects or factors that would go into emotional well-being, social well-being, and resilience, how those actually hang together in this specific context. And after a number of iterations, then we were able to move to the process of actually deploying. So all this to say, we have our multidimensional team and all of our varieties of expertise areas. And we actually are giving to the field, to the audience, two aspects of findings. So one is what Arlene's already talked about in terms of our measures of treatment versus control in academic outcomes and well-being. But the second is this process, and we're hoping that our documentation of the process of developing instruments and deploying them would be useful for researchers and practitioners. So we put a great deal of effort into documenting and sharing this out transparently in hopes that this could be useful for others. So what you see here is from our Journal of Education and Emergencies special issue, where we walk through a number of recommendations based on our factor analysis. So, just starting from the bottom, I think we feel that one of the most important findings is the fact that our approach was robust because of the local leadership and local collaboration. And we would recommend this as a core facet of not only the conduct of psychosocial support, but in the research and study of education in conflict settings. More specifically to the instrument that was developed and validated, we found in the South Sudanese context that the three dimensions that we were measuring, so social well-being, emotional well-being, and resilience and coping, were still the three that we identified. So we found that this three-factor model still made sense. But there were a few interesting items that did not match where we kind of expected them to go. And specifically, the resilience factor had some interesting changes. And I mentioned that because I saw a question in the chat already about that. The idea of resilience is one that includes skills and knowledge about self-regulation and the kinds of positive skills that you might learn in a PSS set of activities. Now, for students in South Sudan, it looks like the concept of resilience is really understood within the context of a school or a child-friendly space. And one of the really interesting things we saw is that the coping skills that would fall under resilience were actually more relevant to things like social interactions and processes. So these kind of coping skills were more kind of set in a social environment. The factors that moved to be part of how we measured resilience were ones that spoke to social cohesion and connecting with others. So that was a particular a contextual, unique finding that we saw as a result of taking this, very detailed and rigorous approach to contextualizing our process. So I'll stop there, but happy to answer more questions along those lines as we move forward.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, and thanks, Moses. So just one more question for our panelists before we move to the questions coming through the chat box. And I'd like to pose this to our colleague Daniel Wani in South Sudan. Daniel, could you give us an indication of how this research was circulated and ultimately used by stakeholders?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tom. I hope you can hear me. Sorry that we were not able to log in, but I'm able to call direct now on phone. Cannot see some of those chat box, but yeah, thanks. In regards to that, yes, the research was actually circulated to various stakeholders, including the USAID in South Sudan, of course, with the technical team here, and also shared with the Washington team. We did also share with the Ministry of Education, especially in the Directorate of Planning and Budgeting, specifically with also the Research Department, and also Education Cluster partners, including UNICEF, which is the implementer for our IES, Integrated Emergency Education Program. And it's support work because they really play a very critical role in implementing education in emergency and psychosocial support intervention using other funding like and of course the national universities. You know very well that the USAID also supported through Indiana University, the University of Juba, to establish education in emergency masters program. This program has been taken up by the university, and of course our research, South Sudanese research, who participated in this study, including Dr. Amur. They are already part, some of them are lecturers in those universities, and I think this research actually provides a ground for these researchers, including the students, to actually begin learning in context of education in emergency and how that will actually inform their further studies. We also, through this program, the UNICEF, before the program actually ended and after the recommendation, UNICEF tried to collate and streamline all the different training activities and psychosocial support to come up with a training model for teachers. And this was initiated with the Ministry of Education, and TOT was done at least 329 teachers brought from different states to become like tutors to roll out this program. However, that is where it is stopped because our funding ended in 2020 and Corona came in. So there is not any update now in terms of incorporating these findings and the research into the curriculum and what is the practice currently. We don't have that on that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Daniel. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Excellent. All right. So now we're going to move to the questions that came in through the chat box. These are kind of no particular order, although there's one question that kind of focuses on the overall study, and I'm going to put this question forward to either Arlene or Jennifer. This came from Ann Sellers from Catholic Relief Services. From your perspective, what was the most exciting outcome you found, or conversely, what was the most surprising?
I can take a first crack at it. So this might be a little bit counterintuitive, but as Arlene mentioned, we found kind of small, significant positive effects for literacy, and some very small or insignificant negative effects for math, as well as some positive differences for the well-being and resilience measures. I think it was actually really a positive surprise that we detected these effects at all, because if you think about just how long the process of recovery and growth that I would expect to see in some of these outcomes would take. The fact that we were able to detect some significant positive results, and you see here we're doing some of the tests that some of the statistical tests determining the positive differences that Moses is showing. I think it was actually really notable that we were able to detect these effects at all, given how long I would expect social emotional learning, psychosocial support to have an effect on well-being and academic outcomes.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Thanks. And I'll go the total opposite direction and show my bias for qualitative research and say that, though we focused a lot on the survey and assessments part of this, for me, the most exciting, the most interesting information came out of the qualitative portion of this, the 5 case studies that were conducted in one school, one treatment school in each state, really going in depth, doing key informant interviews with teachers, school administrators, implementers, education officials, and then focus group discussions with some of the students, both boys and girls. And I think that's where we got the sort of rich depth to understanding and interpreting what we found. Not that anything that came out of those discussions, I would say, is super surprising, but I would say the most important thing, the lesson that we always need to consider is just the importance of holistic approaches to providing support. So the fact that as some of the participants in the interviews and the focus groups discussions said, psychosocial support is great, but we also need food, and if we don't have food, it doesn't really matter how much psychosocial support we receive. And just needing to look at the support that's given to a particular community and consider all aspects, even if sometimes those are not within your scope as an implementer or as a donor. So for me, that was the most valuable to reinforce lessons that I already consider incredibly important.
Excellent. Great. Thanks very much. I'll move right along to some questions that speak to the methods that were used. So, and this question comes from Placidus de Balema. Did you go beyond to explore why there were differences for girls in terms of emotional well-being?
Maybe I'll start, and Jennifer, were you gonna? I was just gonna say, a lot of the open questions that exist in this, we haven't really been able to delve into the whys, but it's certainly in keeping with other studies that have recently been published. And it's unfortunate that I think Wendy from USAID was unable to join at the last minute this morning, because I think she was going to talk about this a little bit. But one of the things that I think we really need to look at is findings that suggest that if psychosocial support is not specifically designed to address marginalized populations, whether that's gender or disability or several other factors, that those particular populations actually underperform. And if the psychosocial support considers that in the development of the activities and creates targeted support mechanisms for those groups, then they actually outperform their peers. So there's a lot to study there. We didn't get into that. We had a very short time frame and couldn't go back and try and look at that. But it's an area that is really, really important to look at, and it's something that others are studying as well. And Jennifer, would you like to add?
I would echo a lot of what Arlene has said, that it was certainly not surprising, given the research about the way that marginalized groups would benefit from more targeted psychosocial activities. I think it somewhat mirrors what we were hypothesizing about why there might have been more positive effects on reading, on reading literacy than numeracy, given the psychosocial activities, the psychosocial support activities focus on communication and skills that would translate more into reading literacy than numeracy. Similarly, the psychosocial activities were not tailored necessarily to the different types of experiences and traumas that boys versus girls would have experienced during the conflict and post-conflict and interim between the ongoing conflicts. So I think, again, were we to have another couple $1 million and more time, if that's something that USAID wants us to do, sure. I think applying the same process that we went through to specific populations would be a very good way to think about it. So we went through this very robust process of contextualizing the instrument that we use to measure to the intervention, to the local context. Similarly, if we wanted to really focus on marginalized groups, as Arlene said, like by gender, disability, ethnic or linguistic groups, we would then also tailor that process to scope for that context as well.
Excellent, great, thanks very much. I'm kind of going to move us on maybe to some results questions here. Did you guys find that did all students have less desirable numeracy scores? And in those interventions, and those in the interventions, was that decline greater?
So I can speak to that a little bit, and I'll ask Moses to maybe go back to one of the slides that we were sharing with all our, extensive detail on the numeracy scores. Let me first clarify that we were looking at only the outcome. So by that I mean we did not have a pre-test that was then measured in terms of growth to a post-test. We had, as Arlene said, we had a limited time frame and scope for what we were doing. So we were really just looking at identifying what we would consider treatment and control schools and comparing them at a given point in time in terms of their outcomes. And Moses, maybe we can go to the is it this one? So in looking at the outcomes for on average, I think these are the mean scores. Let's go to the final outcome scores. Yeah, it's further back. So we found across the board that there were some specific aspects of numeracy that the treatment schools were actually a little bit lower. But again, I would say it was by and large pretty mixed results. And again, I would point to the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of time in terms of the intervention to then have, I think, an impact on numeracy scores. If we went back again, I might expect those to be to have a more notable difference.
And were you referring to like the aggregate sum scores?
Yes.
Those are right here, just at the bottom. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we can come back to that. We'll pull up another slide, but I think overall the story is really that there was the results were rather mixed, and I don't think that we have kind of enough time from the intervention beginning to be able to then see what I would expect to be a longer term effect.
Great. Thanks very much, Jennifer. In terms of kind of situating us a little bit as well, can you just articulate again, how did you define emotional well-being within the South Sudan context? And then also in terms of our team composition, were there any measurement experts or psychometricians involved in the study?
Yes, I can take a crack at this. So this excerpt is pulled from the literature, our journal article, at the Journal on Education in Emergencies. So we define emotional well-being as a person's internal state as demonstrated through their emotions and feelings, and the definitions of the other well-being measures are placed here. So that's with regard to the definition. Arlene, do you want to talk about why Melissa isn't here?
Just that, yeah, our colleague at CRS handles the measurement side of this, and she is unable to attend today, unfortunately. But yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Maybe another question in terms of the results here. Are you able to speak to, or what do you think is the reason for the lack of the effect on the intervention on resilience? Is there something that needs to be done to the context of the intervention in order to notice a significant effect?
I can offer, some hypotheses again, as Arlene was alluding to, some of the qualitative work that could really explain the why. We were able to scratch the surface, but really this would require a lot more extensive and focused study of these particular aspects. I think one of the things that we found interesting with the resilience piece is not necessarily that there wasn't a significant difference between the treatment and control schools, but that the way that resilience showed up or was measurable in South Sudan looked a little bit different. And again, as I mentioned before, the coping skills and knowledge that that experts in child development and psychometricians would say comprise the resilience domain were more situated in a social interaction context, so more dependent on like how do students kind of lean on others, how do learners lean on others to be resilient, rather than that being an individualized skill, which I think is particularly interesting in a post-conflict setting where building social cohesion again is of vital importance. I think it's notable that the fact that there wasn't a difference between the treatment and control isn't necessarily a bad thing if social cohesion is being rebuilt in control schools as well. The other thing I would point to is one of certainly the limitations that we struggled with was defining the treatment versus control schools. I think all of us, including Tom and Dr. Amur, can talk a bit about navigating that. Some of the control schools had teachers who had experience being trained in psychosocial support at other schools, given teacher mobility. So there certainly was a bit of treatment overlap a bit that may also explain some of the differences being somewhat muddied.
I may come in here. I think some of the issues also we encountered while we were in the field is a clear distinction between emotional well-being, social well-being, and coping mechanisms that were employed. So students, while they were answering these questions, so they have some problems of, you see, deep understanding of, you see, what are the distinctions between. So the answer seems sometimes to be a kind of, you see, they want to please, they don't want to show some of the weaknesses that you see that were obvious. And so the way they answer these questions, in my view, there is some kind of lack of deeper understanding of, you see, of the distinctions between all these three categories of, you see, of well-being. And I think that is why I mentioned in my intervention earlier that this is a gap. It's an area where we need really, you see, to focus on in our future research. And then if we could come up with very clear, you see, aspect or factors of resilience that can be, you see, contextualized in our own culture here. Because the perception here is that well-being is a holistic kind of thing. Dividing it into a small part might be a little bit tricky for some of the students. Remember, they're still young. And I think that is an area which there is still some gap which we need really to investigate further.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Dr. Amur, and everybody. I'm noticing the time, and I believe we're kind of done, and want to be respectful of everyone's the time that everybody carved out for this. Yeah, just thanks very much to all our panelists for presenting today. There's a lot more that could be said, and there were a number of other questions, and thanks to the plenary for your contributions to questions and your participation today. And I did note that Arlene did send out the link to the final report within the chat box. But please, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the Laser Pulse Consortium, and we're happy to field them offline. Maybe I'll turn it back to my colleague, Chris, to close us out.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Arlene, Amur, Jennifer, Moses, Daniel, for your wonderful presentation, for all the discussion that we've had here today. Thank you as well to our audience and all the wonderful questions that we received. It's unfortunate we weren't able to get to all of them. I hope that you can check out the links that have been provided here today to a full report, to a recent publication, to additional website content that you can go into and read more about the great work that's been done here. Just to close us out, stay tuned for more from Laser Focused. We'll be having another event in late March on barriers to effective collaboration between researchers and practitioners. So if you're interested in a broad topic and a recent study on those sorts of findings, look out for an email in your inbox to join that, and please register in the Laser Pulse Network to continue to receive information about those. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you all.